With flying humans, magicians, and talking trees being just some of the wonderful things that people accept as perfectly normal in comics, it is fair to say that the medium more or less exists to make you ask yourself impossible questions. Often this revolves around what you would sacrifice to save the world or your loved ones, as even characters with insane powers still have difficult decisions to which there really isn't a right answer. This isn't a bad thing though, because it does work to massively humanize figures who can appear to have all the answers by giving them a scenario where it's to some degree a lose-lose situation. Because no matter how worked out you've got your life, you're still going to struggle when you're presented with the choice of either eating your twin or dooming the world. With that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, and here are 10 comics that made you answer impossible questions. 10. Umbrella Academy. Kill the president to save your brothers. Although the Umbrella Academy series didn't need to include a plot based around the assassination of JFK, it is an undeniably fascinating part of the story. This is partially because of the difficult decision our hero Allison has to make in it, and partially because of the cancelled JFK assassination cover, which was pulled for reasons you can probably guess. In this universe, Allison, or Number 3, is responsible for the president's death, having been blackmailed to use her power to say a rumour and make it true to off him. Although the rest of her family are furious to discover this, Allison has a pretty fair justification. The people making her do it can travel in time and threaten to kill Number 5 and Number 1's mother while she was pregnant with them. While the choice for Allison is obvious, in no small part because of her quasi-incestuous relationship with Number 1 Luther, it's definitely one that gives you pause for thought, as the choice between family and the promising future of the country is a pretty tough call to say the least. 9. Scott Pilgrim. Are you a bad person? As much as Scott Pilgrim is a likable character, he's also one that starts the series deeply flawed. Not only is his relationship and subsequent cheating on the 17-year-old Knives kind of questionable, but we also later learn that his past is rife with him being kind of awful to his friends and love interests alike. Though it's made clear that Scott hasn't had a proper chance to think about most of his mistakes because the comic's main villain Gideon has toyed with his memories, it's not as though this changes the fact that he did do all of these things. While we see Scott grow throughout the course of the series, it's surreal to think that both we as the reader and Scott himself don't really work out that he's done some sketchy stuff up until a decent chunk of the way through the plot. It's so easy for flawed characters to be shown as monsters, but Scott is so well-meaning for the most part that it really makes you question your own actions for a good couple of weeks after you first read it. 8. And Then Emily Was Gone. Your life or a child's. And Then Emily Was Gone is an unusual little treat of a comic, with a visceral and gross art style, unsettling characters galore, and a mysterious and vaguely worrying ending. But before all that, it's worth explaining the premise the series works on. It revolves around Greg Hellinger, who is recruited by Fiona in order to try and rescue her from the clutches of the monstrous Bonnie Shaw. Things become slightly more complicated when the duo find Shaw and discover that the creature didn't kidnap Emily, he was actually given her by Emily's mother as a sort of grim sacrifice. Bonnie explains that he has to leave with a sacrifice or he risks destroying the world itself. Aware the life of a young, innocent child hangs in the balance, Greg makes an especially difficult choice and offers to trade himself for Emily, which Bonnie Shaw accepts. In an especially painful twist, Fiona takes Emily back to their home, only to appear to realize that this Emily is yet another monster instead of the real deal. It's left ambiguous whether this is true or if Fiona is paranoid, but either way, she errs on the side of caution and sets Emily on fire, meaning Greg's sacrifice was completely in vain. 7. Batman Under the Red Hood. Family or justice. The relationship between Jason Todd and Batman is one that really deserves to still be explored far more than it already is, because it's one of the most unusual dynamics in DC history. That in mind though, perhaps the reason the pair's complex relationship is not covered often nowadays is because the first comic to do so, Under the Red Hood, did it best. Seeing Batman torn between making things right with the child he thought he'd lost forever, or staying true to his principles and morals, is the kind of stuff you can't physically turn away from. Though Todd has grown somewhat closer with the old man over the years, it's hard to argue with his frustration that his mentor and father valued the Joker's life more than getting revenge for the death of his adoptive son. 6. Attack on Titan. Become a monster to destroy monsters? Attack on Titan, if nothing else, can be said to provide the most surprising series of plot twists throughout its sordid little history, because as anyone who's ever seen one of the Titans can attest, you are immediately convinced they are monsters from the minute you see them, firstly because they're terrifying, and secondly because dang do they eat a lot of people. So when our protagonist Eren uncovers his ability to turn into one of these creatures, it raises a whole lot of questions. Eren slowly slips from protagonist to the great villain of the story, deciding to try and destroy the world because it's the only way he can think of stopping the Eternal War, as all sides consider the other monsters just like the Titans. Given that Eren's actions are so justifiable at the outset of the series, you can't help but find yourself questioning where exactly the point of no return was for him in the story, and if you'd have done anything different yourself. 5. Planet Hulk. Send your friend into space to protect the world. You all know the story by now. After Bruce loses his temper and goes fully berserk in Las Vegas, the collection of ultimately well-meaning heroes known as the Illuminati send him to a peaceful planet for the rest of his days. Without his consent, by the way. They just package him up and send him. But you can see why they sent Bruce and his green co-pilot away from Earth, just given how much of a threat he can pose, which only proved more so when Banner returns to Earth pissed as hell and beats the 10 bells out of everyone he thinks is responsible. Most people turn to Civil War when discussing complicated conflicts between heroes, but Planet Hulk presents an equally difficult decision. And honestly, it's not even the worst thing Marvel's Illuminati has ever done. 4. Seconds. What if you could fix your mistakes? Coming from the same pen that authored Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Seconds is a clever little comic that details the life of Katie, who owns a restaurant named Seconds. When Katie discovers a magic way to reset time, she uses these little do-overs to try and fix a series of problems in her life, varying in severity from protecting a waitress from getting hurt to actively fixing her relationship with her ex. Naturally, things turn sour very fast, as Katie obsessively attempts to fix everything she sees as a mistake, steadily making things worse until she realizes the error of her ways. Although it's easy to watch her antics and judge, the plot raises a pretty good question. Would we have done anything different if we were in her shoes? Everyone has little mistakes in their life they'd want to change, and it'd be all too easy to try and create the perfect life, given the opportunity. Seconds pulls off the classic embrace life as it is message with aplomb, while also reminding us that mistakes are a natural, healthy part of life. Unless you, kill someone, I guess. Don't do that. 3. Watchmen. Would you do terrible things for world peace? One of the most engaging things about all of Watchmen has to be the devilish plot of Ozymandias, as there is still fan debate over 30 years later as to whether it could be considered justified. For those who haven't read the comic or need a refresher, Ozzy's plan is thus: to set loose a Cthulhu-like creation made in a lab, kill off half of New York, and convince everyone that this was an alien invasion, causing humanity to unite against a new extraterrestrial threat. On one hand, the series is set out in the midst of a Cold War that has only gotten worse because of the obvious threat America has in the form of the unbelievably powerful Dr. Manhattan. And this alien homicide does legitimately create world peace, where there otherwise might not have been. However, that doesn't change the fact that it is mass murder, and lying to the general public about who's responsible for said mass murder, and mass murder to prevent an outcome that didn't happen in the real world, at which point half of New York was vaporized for literally no reason. 2. New Avengers, destroying another universe to save your own. It's fairly common knowledge that the covert superhero group named the Illuminati don't exactly do nice things, but nobody was expecting them to literally destroy another world, and yet that's exactly what happened in New Avengers, when our heroes became threatened during the incursions. Aware that the multiverses colliding would destroy their planet, the team tried several methods before settling on blowing up rival worlds in order to save themselves. It is genocide on an unprecedented scale, and it is especially sobering to know now, historically, some of the most villainous stuff done in Marvel history has been done by some of the people who are its greatest heroes. But if it's your world versus theirs, what would you do? 1. Chew. Eat your sister to save the world. The minute that you know Chew is a story about a man who can get a psychic history of anything he eats, you know that human bodies are going to be involved at some point. It's gross, but it's inevitable. But none of the stomach-churning things our hero Tony has to eat for the sake of justice compare to the time he eats his twin sister's toe in order to save the day. The suitably named Tony has similar powers to her brother, and sensing her own demise was soon, cut off her toe and mailed it to her twin in order for him to be able to defeat the enemy that was about to kill her. This leads to a uniquely traumatic situation in which Tony is confronted with the choice of either letting his sister's efforts be in vain and the world potentially doomed, or eating his dead twin's toe. It's very rare that cannibalism is the right option, but then again, this one doesn't really have a right option, does it? Bon appetit. And there you have it, folks, 10 comics that made you answer impossible questions. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at YouSlyDogU. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.